5 minutes. That's all it took. No warning. No leaked memo. No royal briefing. Just a sudden, brutal decision that sent shockwaves through Kensington Palace and beyond. Prince William, calculated, composed, and famously cautious, had done the unthinkable. In one swift move, he stripped the palace's communications director of every ounce of media access. Why? What could possibly justify such a public and humiliating power play? The order was delivered without theatrics. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontation. Just a measured statement that landed like a detonation. Access revoked. Credentials suspended. Press channels closed. The words were simple, but their impact was seismic. Years of carefully cultivated authority erased in a single stroke. Inside the palace, conversations halted mid-sentence. Senior aides, seasoned veterans of royal crises, reportedly stared in stunned silence, struggling to process what had just happened. This was not how things were done. Not here. Not like this. Within moments, the machinery of media engagement froze. Calls went unanswered. Scheduled briefings disappeared from calendars. Journalists who once enjoyed privileged access suddenly found themselves in the dark. A blackout had been imposed, swift and absolute. And in a monarchy that survives on narrative control, cutting off communication is not just administrative, it is symbolic. It is power. It is punishment. For years, Prince William had been known as the steady one. Diplomatic. Thoughtful. Reluctant to inflame tensions. But this was different. This was decisive. There was no attempt to soften the blow, no quiet reassignment to spare embarrassment. Instead, the message was unmistakable. Authority rests here. And it will not be challenged. The shift from diplomacy to dominance was impossible to ignore. Something had changed. Or perhaps something had finally snapped. Whispers began almost immediately. Betrayal. That word drifted through corridors and private offices, heavy and dangerous. Had confidential discussions found their way into the press? Had carefully guarded strategies been exposed? In an institution where loyalty is currency, even the suspicion of disloyalty is enough to trigger collapse. And William, fiercely protective of his family and his future reign, was not a man willing to gamble with trust. Media access within the palace is more than a privilege, it is influence. It is the ability to shape perception, to guide public sympathy, to shield the monarchy from storms. To strip someone of that access is to strip them of relevance. It is to declare them no longer trusted with the narrative of the crown. And that declaration, delivered so publicly, carried an undercurrent of warning. To one individual, yes, but perhaps to others as well. Outside the palace walls, the silence roared. Commentators scrambled. Speculation ignited. The absence of explanation only intensified the drama. Because when a future king makes a move this bold without offering justification, it raises a chilling question. What does he know that we don't? Behind the composed exterior of royal routine, deeper cracks were beginning to show, fault lines running beneath polished ceremonies and carefully managed appearances. And if 5 minutes were enough to upend one of the palace's most powerful figures, then the real story wasn't the decision itself, it was what had forced William's hand. But to understand why William would risk igniting a palace inferno, we have to go back before the silence, before the strip down, to the quiet tension building behind gilded doors. For years, the communications director wasn't just an employee, they were the invisible architect of royal survival. Every headline softened, every scandal reframed, every whisper carefully redirected. They stood at the intersection of truth and strategy. And yet, the very person entrusted with protecting Prince William's image may have become the greatest threat to it. What happens when the guardian of your reputation starts rewriting your story? Long before the 5-minute shock that stunned the palace, this figure had quietly risen through the ranks with surgical precision. They understood the press not as an adversary, but as a battlefield. They learned which journalists could be trusted, which editors could be nudged, and which stories could be buried beneath more favorable distractions. Their talent was undeniable. In moments when public opinion threatened to tilt dangerously, they restored balance. When rumors circled too close to home, They redirected attention with carefully calibrated leaks and strategic silence. Success followed them. So did influence. Over time, that influence deepened. Meetings that once required approval began to orbit around their advice. Statements from Kensington Palace bore their fingerprints, subtle shifts in tone. Deliberate phrasing. Emotional cues designed to shape how William would be perceived. The future king's image evolved under their watch. Modern, steady, empathetic. It was a triumph of narrative craftsmanship. But narrative, when controlled by one voice for too long, can become power in disguise. And power, even when wrapped in loyalty, has a way of reshaping intentions. At first, the tension was almost imperceptible. A disagreement over how much transparency the public deserved. A debate about whether silence would protect or provoke. William, instinctively protective of his family, leaned toward caution. The communications director, ever strategic, sometimes pushed for calculated exposure release just enough to steer the story before others could. It worked. Until it didn't. There were moments, small, easily dismissed, when William reportedly sensed something shifting. Briefings that felt slightly rehearsed. Advice that seemed more focused on optics than authenticity. Suggestions to modernize messaging in ways that edged dangerously close to manipulation. Nothing explosive. Nothing undeniable. Just subtle fractures in what had once felt like unwavering alignment. And yet, within those fractures, ambition can quietly take root. The communications director had built relationships across media landscapes. They knew how stories traveled, how public sympathy could be engineered. With that knowledge came leverage. The ability to influence not only how the monarchy responded to events, but how those events were perceived before the palace even spoke. For a future king determined to carve his own legacy, that kind of influence was both invaluable and unsettling. Then came the sensitive briefings. Private discussions meant to remain confined within the palace's inner circle. Conversations about long-term strategy, about protecting Catherine, about reshaping the monarchy for a new generation. And within those discussions, disagreements sharpened. Not loud, not dramatic, but pointed. William wanted authenticity. The director argued for calculated narrative dominance. The line between guidance and control began to blur. Loyalty and ambition, once aligned, now seemed to pull in different directions. What makes betrayal so devastating is not always the act itself, but the realization that it may have been building quietly for months. And as William reflected on past decisions, past headlines, past strategic moves, a question likely haunted him. Had he been advised or managed? Because beneath polished press releases and smiling balcony waves, something far more dangerous was brewing. It started as a whisper, an insider tip that wasn't supposed to exist. A private briefing. A strategic conversation. A detail that never should have reached the press. Yet somehow it did. And within hours, tabloids were running stories that struck far too close to home. Prince William saw the headline. Then, he saw the betrayal. But was it intentional sabotage or a calculated gamble gone wrong? The timing was surgical. The leak surfaced just as the palace was preparing to unveil a carefully planned initiative meant to strengthen public trust. Instead of unity, the narrative shifted overnight. Headlines referenced private strategy sessions, internal disagreements, even phrasing that mirrored conversations held behind secured doors. These were not guesses. They were fragments of truth, distorted but unmistakably real. Someone had talked. Or someone had allowed something to slip. For William, the shock was immediate. Not theatrical, not explosive. Just a quiet, hardening realization. The kind that settles in the chest and refuses to leave. He had spent years refining how he would lead carefully, deliberately, protecting both the institution and his family from unnecessary exposure. And now, sensitive internal discussions were being dissected in public. It wasn't just embarrassing. It was destabilizing. Emergency meetings followed, urgent and tense. Phones were examined. Timelines reconstructed. Who had access? Who had been present? Who stood to gain from shifting the narrative at that precise moment? The communications director, once the master of managing crises, now found themselves at the center of one. Not formally accused. Not publicly questioned. but quietly scrutinized. Digital trails became the new battleground. Emails reviewed, call logs revisited, informal contacts reevaluated. The palace, usually so composed, turned inward with a rare intensity. Because this was not merely about a story in the press, it was about control slipping through unseen cracks. It was about trust eroding from the inside. Within the communications team, unease spread quickly. Loyal staff who had worked tirelessly to protect the monarchy now questioned each other in hushed tones. Subtle alliances formed. Silence became heavier than words. And in that silence, suspicion grew. Had the leak been an attempt to steer public opinion, a miscalculation intended to test a new narrative approach, or something more deliberate, an assertion of influence that went too far? For William, the emotional weight cut deeper than headlines. The story did not just reference strategy, it brushed dangerously close to personal matters, decisions involving Catherine, the children, and the future image of their family. To see those private considerations debated in public felt like exposure without consent. A boundary crossed. A line violated. The monarchy survives on perception, but it breathes on loyalty. And loyalty, once fractured, is almost impossible to restore. As the hours passed, William reportedly grew quieter, more resolute. Shock gave way to suspicion. Suspicion hardened into clarity. He understood that this moment would define not just the outcome of a leak, but the tone of his future reign. Would he tolerate internal maneuvering disguised as strategic brilliance? Or would he draw a line clear and irreversible? The communications director, once untouchable in their expertise, now stood under an invisible cloud. Every past decision reevaluated. Every media success reconsidered through a new lens. What once looked like mastery now carried the faint shadow of manipulation. And as the palace scrambled to contain the fallout, William faced a choice that would define his leadership style forever. Prince William has long been described as measured, patient, strategic. But beneath that calm exterior lies a man fiercely protective of his legacy and his family. When trust collapses in the royal inner circle, it doesn't just bruise egos, it threatens the crown itself. And in that moment, William made it clear, this would not be another scandal handled softly. For years, he had operated within the traditional rhythms of monarchy: consult, deliberate, maintain composure. He understood the weight of history on his shoulders. He knew that every reaction would be studied, every word dissected. So he learned restraint. He mastered it. But restraint is not weakness. And when the leak exposed private strategy and brushed too close to Catherine and their children, something shifted. The patient air began to harden into something else. This was no longer about managing headlines. It was about control, about defining what kind of king he intended to become. Inside palace walls, the old guard preferred subtle corrections, quiet demotions, internal adjustments disguised as routine restructuring. That was the way it had always been done: minimize noise, protect the illusion of unity. But William had grown increasingly aware that illusion without integrity is fragile. He had watched how slow responses could invite speculation, how compromise could be mistaken for hesitation. And he refused to let internal manipulation, however strategic it claimed to be, undermine his authority. The tension between tradition and transformation had been building long before the leak. Senior advisors, steeped in decades of cautious diplomacy, urged patience. Investigate quietly. Avoid spectacle. Preserve institutional dignity. But William's vision for the monarchy was different. Leaner. Stronger. Less tolerant of internal gamesmanship. He wanted clarity, not choreography. And beneath that strategic resolve was something deeply personal. Catherine had endured relentless scrutiny for years. Every appearance analyzed. Every absence questioned. William had stood beside her through it all, absorbing criticism, shielding her when he could. To see private family considerations appear in the press, no matter how subtly, felt like a violation of trust. It wasn't just a professional misstep. It was an intrusion into the one space he fought hardest to protect. The burden of safeguarding her dignity weighed heavily. He knew that how he responded now would echo for years. If he appeared indecisive, it would invite further boundary crossings. If he acted too aggressively, critics would brand him authoritarian. But leadership, he understood, is rarely comfortable. It demands choices that unsettle. So he made one. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but with cold, deliberate calculation. He reviewed timelines, assessed patterns, revisited conversations that once seemed harmless, but now carried sharper edges. And as the pieces aligned, he reached a conclusion that left no room for ambiguity. The culture inside the palace needed recalibration. Influence without accountability could no longer thrive. In that realization, the heir transformed into an enforcer. He would not tolerate internal maneuvering disguised as strategic brilliance. He would not allow personal loyalty to cloud institutional integrity. And he would not let anyone, even a trusted communications director, blur the line between advising and steering. Those closest to him sensed the change, the quiet resolve, the narrowing of options. This was not a man reacting to a single leak. This was a future monarch defining the boundaries of his reign before it even began. And as his decision crystallized, one truth became unavoidable. The move he was about to make would not simply correct a problem, it would redraw the power map within Kensington Palace. But the decision he was about to make wouldn't just send a message, it would detonate a hierarchy. There was no drawn-out negotiation, no quiet reassignment. In one decisive order, Prince William stripped the communications director of all media access. Credentials revoked. Meetings canceled. Authority erased. 5 minutes, that's how long it took to dismantle years of influence. The palace walls may be historic, but power inside them shifts fast. And this was a public dismantling disguised as internal restructuring. The directive moved through Kensington Palace like a controlled detonation. Press privileges were suspended immediately. Invitations to high-level strategy sessions vanished. Access to sensitive briefings gone. It was not framed as punishment. It was framed as necessity. But everyone inside those corridors understood what it meant. This was not administrative housekeeping. This was a line drawn in ink that would not fade. Senior aides, accustomed to gradual transitions and carefully worded adjustments, found themselves blindsided. Some had worked alongside the communications director for years, witnessing their rise, benefiting from their media expertise. They had seen crises diffused, reputations salvaged, storms weathered. And now, in an instant, that authority had been stripped bare. The speed alone sent a message more powerful than any official statement ever could. The media, once guided by that same director's steady hand, was left scrambling. Journalists who had relied on privileged briefings found their calls unanswered. Editors sensed turbulence, but lacked confirmation. The silence was deafening. And in that silence, speculation grew teeth. Was this a quiet resignation? A strategic retreat? Or something far more volatile unfolding behind palace doors? Inside, the vacuum was immediate. With the communications director removed from the narrative battlefield, no clear successor stepped forward. Teams hesitated, uncertain who now held the final word on messaging. Meetings felt heavier. Every sentence was weighed more carefully. Because when influence evaporates overnight, uncertainty rushes in to fill the space. For staff members who had built careers under that director's guidance, the emotional impact was sharp. Loyalty collided with survival instincts. Some felt betrayed. Others felt relieved. A few quietly wondered if they too were being evaluated through a harsher lens. William's decision had not only removed a powerful figure, it had shifted the atmosphere. The palace felt different. Tighter. Less forgiving. And then there was the symbolism. Media access within the monarchy is currency. It determines who shapes the narrative, who protects the crown's image, who controls the flow of perception. To strip someone of that access is to declare them unfit to guard the story. It is a humiliation delivered not with raised voices, but with revoked credentials. Years of carefully built relationships dissolved in a single order. Influence reduced to memory. Yet beneath the surface, a more unsettling question lingered. Was this punishment for a specific leak, or was it a warning, an unmistakable signal to anyone tempted to blur the lines of authority? William had not publicly accused. He had not explained. He had simply acted. And in doing so, he reinforced a chilling truth. Loyalty is not assumed. It is tested. The communications director, once untouchable in their expertise, now stood isolated, not dismissed outright, not publicly disgraced, but effectively sidelined from the very arena that defined their power. The fall was swift, and swift falls are rarely accidents. But even as the palace adjusted to this sudden recalibration of power, a deeper tension simmered beneath the surface. Because removing one architect of narrative control does not automatically restore trust. It exposes fault lines, it invites scrutiny, and it leaves a lingering uncertainty about what else may be uncovered. Yet stripping access wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of something much bigger. When control slips inside a monarchy, fear spreads faster than headlines. Staff whispered in corridors. Phones buzzed with frantic speculation. Was this a purge, a warning shot, or the start of a broader internal reckoning? The communications director may have lost media access, but others suddenly feared they could be next. The atmosphere shifted almost overnight. What had once felt like a carefully synchronized institution now carried an undercurrent of instability. Conversations grew shorter. Laughter disappeared. Every email felt heavier, every meeting more deliberate. Staff who had once moved confidently through palace routines now measured their words, aware that loyalty was no longer assumed, it was being assessed. Morale faltered quietly. Some aides questioned whether years of dedication could be undone by a single misstep. Others worried that proximity to the fallen director might cast suspicion on them as well. Alliances that once seemed solid began to fracture. Subtle distancing occurred. Colleagues who had previously aligned themselves closely with the communications director now adopted a cautious neutrality. In an environment built on trust and discretion, association suddenly felt dangerous. And in that uncertainty, factions began to form. There were those who believed William had done what was necessary. They saw strength in his decisiveness, a long overdue recalibration of power. To them, this was not chaos, it was leadership asserting itself. But others, quieter and more unsettled, feared the implications. If someone so central could be sidelined in 5 minutes, what protections remained for anyone else? The question lingered, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. Rumors of internal investigations circulated like sparks in dry air. Digital communications reviewed. Meetings revisited. Conversations re-examined. No formal announcement was made, yet the sense of scrutiny intensified. Staff began to wonder if this was the first move in a broader cleanse, a restructuring not just of one role, but of an entire culture. Amid the tension, one presence remained steady: Catherine. She did not issue statements or publicly intervene. She didn't need to. Those close to the palace sensed her influence in the background, subtle yet firm. Her priority had always been stability, especially for their children, and stability required boundaries. If private family matters had indeed edged into public narratives, then recalibrating control wasn't just strategic, it was personal. William's grip on his inner circle tightened. Access became more restricted. Fewer voices were invited into key discussions. Decisions moved through narrower channels. What once felt collaborative now felt concentrated. Some interpreted this as caution. Others saw consolidation. But everyone understood one thing. The future king was reshaping the perimeter around himself and his family. The broader implications rippled outward. Transparency, once championed as a modernizing force, now seemed complicated. How much openness invites vulnerability? How much control stifles trust? These questions hovered over the palace like a gathering storm. The communications director's removal was no longer just about one leak, it symbolized a larger struggle between narrative freedom and institutional authority. Inside Kensington, uncertainty became the new normal. The old equilibrium had been disrupted. And while no additional dismissals followed immediately, the psychological impact was undeniable. The message had been delivered without spectacle but with precision. The monarchy's survival would not be entrusted to unchecked influence. Yet while tension tightened within palace walls, forces beyond them were already stirring. Speculation does not remain contained. And as whispers inside turned into questions outside, the fragile calm William sought to restore was about to be tested on a far larger stage. But outside the palace gates, another storm was gathering, and this one couldn't be controlled so easily. When the media realized the architect of royal messaging had been cut off from the press, The irony was impossible to ignore. Reporters demanded answers. Commentators sensed blood in the water. If Prince William was willing to dismantle his own communications team, what did that reveal about the state of the monarchy? Within hours, the story exploded beyond palace gates. Tabloids ran urgent banners. International outlets followed with speculative analyses. The same journalists who once received carefully timed briefings now pieced together fragments from anonymous sources and off-the-record whispers. The narrative, once tightly choreographed, had slipped into chaos. And in the absence of an official explanation, imagination took control. Online, competing theories clashed in real time. Some framed the move as a bold act of leadership, a future king refusing to tolerate internal compromise. Others painted it as a power grab, evidence of insecurity masked as strength. Social media amplified every interpretation. Each thread, each headline, each opinion layered another version of events onto an already volatile situation. The monarchy's image, so meticulously maintained, now felt exposed to unpredictable forces. The debate over William's leadership style intensified. Was this decisive governance or impulsive overreach? Was he modernizing the institution or consolidating control? Analysts dissected his past public appearances. His tone in previous statements, his long-standing emphasis on protecting his family. Supporters argued that he had drawn a necessary boundary. Critics countered that stripping a senior figure of authority without public clarity risked appearing opaque, perhaps even authoritarian. The word authoritarian began circulating more frequently. Commentators questioned whether transparency had been sacrificed for control. They asked whether this was the beginning of a more guarded monarchy, less willing to engage openly with scrutiny. Yet at the same time, loyalists defended him fiercely. They described a man determined to protect both his wife and the integrity of the institution he would one day lead. To them, this wasn't suppression, it was protection. The international reaction added another layer of pressure. Across Europe and beyond, headlines reflected both fascination and concern. Some foreign commentators interpreted the internal shakeup as evidence of generational change. Others saw instability. The monarchy, an enduring symbol of continuity, suddenly appeared unsettled. And perception, in a digital age where narratives travel faster than facts, can become reality almost overnight. Silence, once a strategic shield, became increasingly risky. Every hour without explanation widened the space for speculation. In previous decades, controlled messaging might have contained the fallout. But now, in a world driven by constant updates and viral commentary, absence fueled suspicion. The palace's refusal to elaborate did not quiet the storm, it intensified it. Inside Kensington, advisors likely weighed the cost of speaking against the cost of staying silent. A statement could invite further scrutiny. Silence, however, allowed others to define the narrative. It was perception warfare unfolding in real time. And William, having chosen decisive action internally, now faced the external consequences of that choice. The irony lingered painfully. The man who had just removed the guardian of royal messaging now stood at the center of an uncontrolled narrative surge. Influence had been reclaimed, but control of the conversation was slipping outward. Yet amid the noise, one subtle shift began to surface. Certain whispers hinted that the leak might not have been an isolated error, that perhaps the rupture ran deeper than a single misjudgment. As speculation swelled and headlines multiplied, a darker possibility started to circulate quietly among insiders and commentators alike. And just as the noise reached its peak, whispers began suggesting this wasn't about one leak, it was about a much deeper betrayal. Some insiders claimed the leak was only the surface. Beneath it lay power struggles, ideological clashes, and a battle over the monarchy's future direction. Was the communications director quietly steering narratives that conflicted with William's long-term vision? Was this a calculated attempt to seize subtle influence? Or did William uncover something far more personal and unforgivable? As the media frenzy intensified, a quieter theory began circulating among those who understood palace dynamics. This wasn't just about a misplaced briefing. It was about control over the monarchy's identity in a rapidly changing world. William envisioned a streamlined institution focused, disciplined, emotionally authentic. A monarchy that did not chase headlines but commanded respect through consistency. Yet others believed survival required sharper strategy, more aggressive narrative management, and calculated engagement with modern media ecosystems. The communications director had long championed modernization. Not recklessness, but evolution. Push the narrative forward. Humanize the royals strategically. Release just enough vulnerability to gain sympathy, but never so much that control was lost. It was sophisticated. It worked until it appeared to cross an invisible boundary. Internal disagreements over transparency had been simmering quietly for months. How much should the public know? How much should remain protected? William's instinct leaned toward preserving dignity through restraint. The director argued that silence could breed suspicion, that in the digital age, narrative gaps would always be filled by someone else. On the surface, these debates were professional. Beneath them, they were ideological. Then came the unsettling possibility. What if certain narratives had been subtly guided without William's full awareness? Not fabricated, not false, but shape-nudged in directions that amplified influence beyond simple communication. Allegations began to surface that strategic relationships with external media figures had grown unusually close. Background briefings that felt unofficial yet strangely precise. Patterns that, when revisited, seemed less accidental and more intentional. William reportedly began connecting threads. Moments that once appeared harmless now felt orchestrated. Praise that emerged at oddly convenient times. Stories that softened criticism before it could escalate. Success, when viewed through one lens. Manipulation, when viewed through another. And that is where trust fractures most painfully, not in blatant betrayal, but in the suspicion that someone may have been steering from behind the curtain. For a man preparing to inherit the crown, the idea of being subtly undermined was intolerable. William had built his public identity on sincerity, on stability, on quiet strength. If someone within his inner circle had been recalibrating his image for strategic gain, even with good intentions, it would represent a profound breach. The emotional undertones ran deeper than politics. This was about loyalty, about alignment, about knowing that the person guarding your narrative shares your vision, not just your position. If William felt that the communications director had begun prioritizing influence over integrity, then the fallout was not just professional, it was personal. Refusing to be undermined, he acted. Not with theatrical accusations, but with decisive restructuring. Remove the influence. Reclaim the perimeter. Reassert clarity. The message was unmistakable. The monarchy's direction would not be shaped through quiet maneuvering. Yet insiders sensed this was only the beginning. If ideological clashes had reached this point, further adjustments were inevitable. The palace would not return to its previous balance. It would evolve or fracture. Because stripping one official of power may have been decisive, but reshaping the monarchy would require something even bolder. 5 minutes changed everything. Not just for a communications director, but for Prince William himself. This wasn't just damage control. It was a declaration. A future king stepping out of the shadow of diplomacy and into decisive authority. The monarchy survives on perception, but it thrives on control. And William just proved he's willing to redraw the rules. For years, he had operated within inherited frameworks. Quiet corrections. Carefully worded statements. A reliance on long-standing palace playbooks that favored patience over disruption. But this moment signaled something different. By acting swiftly and publicly without cushioning the fallout, William asserted independence from traditions that no longer aligned with his vision. He was not simply preserving the institution. He was reshaping it. The message resonated far beyond the communications director's office. To insiders, it was unmistakable. Proximity to power does not equal immunity. Influence must remain aligned with the crown's direction or risk removal. To rivals, both internal and external, it demonstrated resolve. The future king would not hesitate when trust faltered. He would not allow ambiguity to linger if it threatened stability. Yet amid the intensity, one presence remained constant: Catherine. Throughout the turbulence, her role was quiet but significant. Stability does not always announce itself. Sometimes it steadies the room simply by existing. Those who observed closely sensed her influence, reinforcing William's resolve while tempering its edges. In moments of crisis, unity becomes strength. And their partnership, forged through years of scrutiny and strain, anchored this decision in something deeper than strategy. It anchored it in shared protection of family and legacy. The long-term implications are only beginning to unfold. Media relations, once managed through carefully cultivated relationships, now enter a recalibration phase. Journalists will approach palace briefings differently. Advisors will weigh their counsel more cautiously. Access will carry new boundaries. The monarchy's engagement with the press may become leaner, more controlled, perhaps less forgiving. Whether this shift builds trust or invites further skepticism remains uncertain. What is certain is that William's image has evolved. He is no longer perceived solely as the composed heir waiting his turn. He has demonstrated the willingness to act decisively, even disruptively, when circumstances demand it. In fragile institutions, swift action can either fracture foundations or reinforce them. The coming months will reveal which outcome this moment has set in motion. There is a contrast that lingers beneath the headlines. On one side, success, the assertion of authority, the reclaiming of narrative control. On the other, suffering, the loss of trust, the internal tremors, the public scrutiny. Leadership rarely arrives without sacrifice. And in choosing firmness over familiarity, William has embraced both the power and the cost of command. Still, unanswered questions hover in the air. Was this the final correction, or merely the first? Will further restructuring follow? Has this strengthened the monarchy's core, or exposed vulnerabilities that will demand even greater change? In institutions built on continuity, transformation never occurs quietly. It echoes. And as observers attempt to interpret what this 5-minute upheaval truly signifies, one thing remains undeniable. The crown's future will not be shaped passively. It will be directed. Deliberately. Firmly. Because if 5 minutes were enough to dismantle one pillar of palace power, imagine what the next 5 might bring.